Hello there.
Hi, how are you doing?
Very well. How are you, Glenn?
I'm excellent, thank you. We've just had a bit of a party on the plot, so I had to drag myself away,
Well, I'm sure
which is not
you're
true, of course. I love being here.
brilliant. And Susan, how about yourself?
I'm well, thank you.
Good.
It's
And Sandra?
really rainy here.
Oh, yeah. And so Susan, remind me again, which state are you in?
I'm in Illinois.
Okay. And Sandra, which state are you in?
Idaho.
Okay. Are you very far from each other? Because I
Oh,
don't know the geography of the USA that well.
Yeah,
you do.
How
Yeah.
we're a day and a half from each other by driving.
How many hours?
We're probably 12, 15 hours depending on where you're at.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Very different time zones.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we're expecting two other people, Chris and Ray. I'm not sure if they'll be able to join us, but I've spoken with, I feel as though I know you very, very well, especially Glenn, who I've had the chance to talk to several times over the past year, but both of you, Sandra and Susan, I interviewed last year. So I'm not sure if you know each other. So maybe let's start with introduction. So Glenn, if you could introduce yourself first of all, please.
Okay. Yes, I think I'm a natural creative type. My mind roams all over the place. You know, they say the problem with creativity is you have so many ideas that you never concentrate on any of them, and you can't make up your mind. So I certainly fit that description, and I was very much involved in engineering to start with, and then I became a trainer, a lecturer. I did some Edward de Bono work in creativity, and I used the concepts in running my workshops to combine all sorts of different approaches, and so that's my passion, is you know, sort of finding new ways of doing anything, to be honest.
Brilliant. And Susan?
I spent 23 years as a theater professor and just left that to pursue my art and writing full time. I'm an author. I just published Midlife Wisdom, and sort of a journal and a place for people to read my essays about what I've learned to this point in my 51 years. And I speak about all my creative endeavors.
Great. And Sandra?
I'm a creativity specialist. I've spent 30 years. I was also a theater professor for many years. I've been teaching acting and improvisation and writing for 30 plus years. I started out as an actor and a professional director and evolved through running lots of film companies, theater companies, etc. And now I coach and consult as a creativity specialist and speak, and I have a book coming out called Spontaneous Brilliance. It's coming out in December, and it's really just helping everyone to empower their own unique creative genius, because I have done a lot of work with kids with special needs, lots of kids that were supposed to be nonverbal, not be able to write, not be able to do anything, and have really a huge leaps and bounds just discovering that everybody's a genius if we give them the right tools.
Okay, the volume is a little bit low, Sandra. I did hear you, but if you could raise the volume of your microphone, that would be excellent. So the four of us, the four of us who are here at the moment, we have so much in common from what you've just said. Not just our passion for creativity, but also the fact that we all teach in some way, or we have taught. We do workshops and we do training. So my question, just to start off the discussion, was about this issue. Is like we've had a lot of conversations about how we're creative, and over the past 3 years I haven't touched on the other issues, like in addition to being creative ourselves, how is it that we inspire others to be creative? Now, I'm talking from the point of view that we're all educators, so I'm not just talking about our class, in the classroom or in our workshops or in our trainings. How do we inspire others through those formal contexts? But how do we inspire others when we're not being a teacher, we're not being an educator, we're not being a professor, how is it that we inspire others, and how is it that others inspire us in non-formal, casual contexts? So whoever wants to start on that, please do.
Yeah, I'll have a go. I'm always busy. I think one of the most powerful things is to get people to appreciate themselves. I think this whole business of, you know, a lot of people suffer from, you know, being judged all the time, or being evaluated, or, you know, in the workplace, we're always having to, you know, meet requirements, and people forget about their own amazing selves. And it's really a joy for me when I sort of meet people to say, you know, they say something like, well, I'm not very good at that. And I say, what? Never put yourself down, you know, come on, you're amazing. And they glow. You know, and I think that whole sense of, you know, appreciating oneself, then you start to, the juices flow, and people get, because we're all naturally creative. I think that's the wonderful thing, in different ways, of course. You know, some people creative with their mind, some people creative with their hands. So yeah, that's the way. And of course, when somebody's interested in what you do, you know, that also gets you excited, and I think that energy is part of it. That's my feeling anyway.
Yeah, and that word glow, making others glow, that's a talent. And it reminded me of a conversation I had with Sandra last year. You touched on that, because you say that you bring out the genius in your students, right, Sandra?
Absolutely. I mean, I was kind of chuckling when you asked the question, because, can you hear me, by the way? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, yeah, like, I walk into every room believing that everybody I'm talking to is a genius, and that I have something to gain from whatever they have to offer. And so for me, I'm completely in agreement with Glenn. It's about being absolutely present with whomever you're with, and giving their ideas value. I constantly use the word brilliant with people that I'm talking to, and my students is like, that's brilliant, that was brilliant, you're brilliant. And the more that I say it, the more brilliant they get, you know. And it's not that they've changed, it's just that they got comfortable with the safety of the environment. And I really think inspiration comes more freely when we feel safe. And all of us are scared. All of us, you know, that's another way that I think that I do it, is I share my own fears. I'm willing to be vulnerable and tell them, you know, this is how I messed it up. You know, let's try it together. I do the same thing in parenting with my kids. You know, I commend them for trying. I give them, you know, it's all about the trying. It's about the stepping out there. It's about creating a freedom for people to offer their ideas and offer their value, and not expect it to be judged right away. I think you said that, Glenn. You said, you know, we're also judged, and we're so pre-situated to be in fear of that potential judgment that we just don't offer anything. You know?
Yeah,
Sure.
and there's quite a knack in making other people feel safe around us. We all acknowledge that we need to feel safe. We need to feel that we trust the environment that we're in. But some people aren't as adept as making others feel safe around themselves. Do you have any comments on that?
Well, I totally agree with Glenn and Sandra. I think that we model as educators, so we must be willing to put ourselves in the fray. I'll never ask my students to do anything that I wouldn't be willing to do. And I think by doing that, we show that we're among them. We're not above them. We're facilitating, but we're among them. And when we do that, I think something natural occurs, which is that they start to trust, and then that fear starts to fade away. But I also think it's important for us to sort of just be present in the moment and not worry about an end product. I think, you know, the joy is in the journey, And I know certainly from a theatrical standpoint, yes, there's always an opening night, but that's not what I'm most concerned about generally day to day. It's what are they learning in the moment, and what am I modeling in the moment that they can take to opening night. So trying to get rid of fear. I think fear is the big demon that absolutely shuts down creativity, and will just absolutely bring a group to a halt in a moment, as if there's a sense of fear. I think judgment is part of that fear as well. So I think modeling and being more focused on the moment rather than and the journey rather than the end product.
So there's a thing about introversion and extroversion. And when Sandra was talking, you know, when she was talking about, oh, she tells people that they're brilliant, and I can imagine her being very expressive in, you know, just sharing her energy. And then on the other hand, some people are very introvert, and they're not kind of oozing with this energy. Do you find that you feel more inspired around introverts who are kind of like in their own space, or do you feel more inspired by extroverts who are just kind of like gushing with all this presence? Ben, do you have something to say about that?
Yeah, gushing. I think that's one of my Achilles heel. And I think that's when the listening story, because as we know, you know, introverts tend to like to mulch away at the ideas, and they don't immediately come up with responses. And so I found that one of the things I try to do is recognize how much I'm making a noise, and then recognize this is not necessarily good for the other person. It's nice to be, you know, enthusiastic, but, you know, then to sort of really keep quiet, focus on what they're saying, and support, you know, with encouragement, and say, come on, tell me more about that, you know, that's fascinating. Can you tell me more? What's going through your head? You know, the good old coaching things to get them to, think out loud, of course, because I think that's sometimes the challenge for an introvert is to think out loud. It's not necessarily something they do so well. So you have to give them time. So I think that's one of my Achilles heels that I really do watch out for, is to monitor how much noise I'm making and you know, how much I'm listening to them. Yeah.
Yeah, because some introverts can feel a little bit intimidated around extroverts who are, you know, over the top, too flamboyant, and, you know, have too much presence.
Yeah.
You notice that, Sandra?
Well, absolutely. And I used to work a lot with kids that were basically nonverbal. In the education system, people thought they didn't speak and they didn't write. And I would get them speaking and writing extensively. But one of the biggest thresholds that I had to cross was I would bring in these scribes and people to assist them and write for them, you know, because they couldn't write as fast as they could think, and they couldn't speak as fast as they could think. And so training the scribes to sit there and wait and not help and just listen. If they had to sit there for 10 minutes until that person expressed what they needed to express, for them to write it down, and then just write it down verbatim, not judge it. I think that was transformative for every one of those people. If we could get ourselves to stop helping, to stop injecting those ideas for them. One of my early mentors was Anthony Hopkins. And at a time when he was like famous, like we couldn't go anywhere, like, as if that's not true now, but, you know, we couldn't go anywhere that people weren't pointing and, ooh, yeah. But he would sit at a table with a bunch of 20-somethings, you know, we were all a lot of young actors around him, and he would make an absolute point of making eye contact with whoever was speaking and being completely focused on you, like you were sure you were the only person in the world. And I think that is where that safety comes from, That's where you feel valued. You don't have to say anything to make a person feel valued. You just have to hear them and see them. And when we talk about energy, that's what you're doing with that energy, is putting the full welcoming energy of yours toward that person and just saying, I'm here 100%. This is how I want to spend my time, is taking you in completely.
Yeah, and I'd just like to add to that, because I think people are so unused to being focused on like that and being listened to with rapt attention that it's a very powerful tool.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and you both talk about, well, Sandra, you were talking about allowing them the space. So, you know, giving them the time and that space to express themselves, not in the way that you express yourself, but expressing themselves in the way that is best for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I had a young man who said he didn't want to imagine. And I asked him why. And he said, because it hurts. Well, he had a seizure disorder. And so he was never getting to the point where he was actually saying what he had to say. People were always filling in the gaps for him. And so I literally brought a scribe into the room who I had pre-trained and said, when I ask the question of, who their central character is, and he's going to express that, sit there for 10 minutes, absolutely silent if you have to, just sit and wait. He wound up writing a 7-page post-apocalyptic story that nobody ever had any idea was inside him. But she would sit and wait for maybe, I don't know, at least 5 minutes at a time, and not say a word, and just have the pencil poised, and then write exactly what he said. And it didn't look like it made sense at first, but it was absolutely, here's that word again, brilliant. It was absolutely brilliant and extraordinary. And it was inside him all the time, and he knew that. But when he was saying that imagining hurt, it was because it was a painful, awful experience for him to never be heard.
Susan?
I think that the interesting thing about introverts and extroverts, if you buy into one of the definitions being that for extroverts, energy comes from without, and for introverts, energy comes from within, I think that's really hard in the classroom sometimes, because creativity, whether we like it or not, in an educational setting, has to happen on a timeline. And so how do you drive that class and continue the creative process moving forward when the clock is ticking? I think I have always walked the line between introvert and extrovert. I chose a very extroverted kind of career in theater for many years, and certainly as public speaking. But if I'm really honest with myself, my happy place is in my studio with my canvas and really quiet. And that's where I thrive. I can do the others because when you are creative, of course, you want to share that in some way. You want to talk about that. So I think teaching ended up being a really natural profession for me for a long time. But as one gets older, I find that my energy is not as in tune anymore with large groups and big events and large classes. And certainly the millennial energy is a whole other discussion. But I think you have to walk that line between introvert and extrovert in our own selves when we think of ourselves as being at the front of the crowd or the front of the class or in charge of something. We have to sort of be in touch with our own, where's our energy coming from? How are we navigating that energy? And I think the days that I was really off in the classroom were because I wasn't really heeding my inner voice, which said, it needs to be sort of a quiet day. It needs to be, I don't have the energy for the rah-rah today. And what the times that I negated that and said, oh, I got to do it anyway, were the times that the classes weren't that great or the speeches weren't that great because I neglected that inner voice.
he's a typical bully, right?
Yes.
I'm so sorry.
Glenn, is that your background?
Anyway,
Yeah. That's somebody speaking in your background, Glenn. My question for you, Susan, was like, when you think about people that have inspired you, have they inspired you because of something they said, or have they inspired you because of their presence, or what is it about other people?
next time you just shout more.
I think from an artistic standpoint, it's often the product that has inspired me. But then when I read what somebody has written, I find a great deal of inspiration because I can muse over it. I can think about it. My introverted self can ponder that for a while before having to really address it. So yeah, it's a great question, and I think depending on the situation, it's often what people will write that inspires me more.
Okay, and yourself, Sandra, who have, is it people or is it products that have inspired you the most?
Oh, I think it's people. I think the people that have inspired me the most are the people that have been completely authentic. I think, and that goes back to something Susan was saying earlier about not heeding that inner voice. I think I'm always just amazed and inspired by people who say, "This is exactly what I'm feeling," or "This is where I'm at right now." You just know that it's extremely genuine in that moment. I find that profoundly inspiring, and something that I strive for all the time is to be authentic. And so anyone who is authentic, regardless of their area of expertise, I find that incredibly inspiring.
Okay, and yourself, Glenn?
I was thinking about, David Icke. I'm sure some people have heard of David Icke. And I think so he's typical of what inspires me. I think what inspires me is when somebody is able to stick to what they believe against any opposition, it's that self-belief, if you like. And I always remember David Icke went to a conference somewhere and he stood up and they booed him and laughed at him for about 15 minutes. And eventually they tired, of course, of making all this noise. And he said, "That's very interesting." He said, "You guys paid to come and see me." And then he laughed. So that's sort of, I suppose it's total self-belief and the ability to remain calm. It's that sort of inner self, that powerful inner self that most impresses me. And I suppose it's to do with, Sandra, it is about authenticity too, because, when you're authentic, that is like your core personality is totally self-centered, in a positive way. You're in your position, your central self, and then you can, be honest. And I think Susan, was it you mentioned about being vulnerable? So I think you can also, for me, it's that knowing who you are, and you can also then be vulnerable. And I just love it when somebody can say, "You're absolutely right, and you made me realize something that I really need to look at," or, it's that ability to be self-aware. I just love people who are there in themselves, and proud to be a human being without being big-headed, or they're just lovely humility. Yet, my teacher, Jethvir knows I've talked about my guru, my teacher, and he's got this dynamic of being regal and humble. It's an amazing combination, So one way you're looking at this amazing person, and yet at the same time he can be so humble. It's so touching. That's so inspiring. I hope to be like that one day.
Glenn, what you say reminds me of what Sandra was saying about people being authentic. And when you gave the example of David Icke, that example for me is pure courage. It's authentic, true courage. And I, as you were talking about that story, I thought, well, so many people, they pretend to be courageous when actually they're just acting out of, deep fear, and they say they're being courageous, but actually they're being motivated and being driven by this incessant fear, as it were. But the example you gave, someone who can stand there and be booed at and laugh it off, that is pure courage.
Yeah, and maintain a sense of self, you know. Yeah.
Okay, so final comments then. So Susan, to as we wrap this discussion up, for you, what in terms of how we inspire and how we are inspired, what do you think is the most important thing about that concept for yourself?
I think that to be able to meet people where they're at and wherever they're at in their creative journey, and to be able to share your own creative journey. How did you get here? What do you think? What were your influences? What motivates you? I think those key questions are what everyone is going to eventually get asked when you're a creative professional. So I think being able to share those, to be able to be vulnerable, as you all have mentioned. And then I think that the thing that drives my own creativity is just the fact that I am fearless in what I'll try. And so I have had so much success in my art, and I'm totally self-taught. I broke every rule there is. Even though I have an education, I've broken every rule there is, and yet I've had more success, I think, with my art than I have had with other things, because I'm just not afraid. I think you reach a certain age and you don't really care what people think anymore. You don't have to prove yourself. You're okay, and so I think that fearlessness combined with being able to share your journey is important.
It requires a lot of confidence, so
yeah.
You've acquired through your education, you've acquired that level of high self-esteem and high confidence where you're able to say, I can put those rules away because I know better than that.
Yes, it's a good place to be.
Excellent. And Sandra, how about yourself, just to wrap up now?
I think it's all about, for me, it's just about the trying. It's about the, and Susan just said that, I'm always saying to my students or actors that I'm directing, just try, just go ahead, just try. Don't worry about whether or not it's going to work. Let's try it. Show me. We'll see. And I think that has been, people used to say to me all the time, oh, you're so fearless. I would say, no, I'm just more afraid of not having tried this and what that will feel like than failing. Failing is, you try it, it didn't work, there's the next thing. And I think that's what it's all about for me, is just recognizing that the fun is, and again, Susan said this at the beginning, the fun is in the journey, giving it a try, getting out there, seeing what happens. Life is an improvisation. And whether you recognize that or not, that's the core of my teaching, is that we're all offering, accepting, or blocking. And let's not block. Let's just offer and accept and see what happens. It's just about trying and taking the journey and seeing where you get to, and knowing that there's always another side. There's always going to be another opportunity to try something else if that didn't work, so yeah.
Yes,
that's it for me.
Experimenting, so allowing ourselves to experiment with life.
Yes, absolutely. Okay. That's where the fun is.
And having fun experimenting, yes. Glenn, go ahead.
I'm everything. It's that feeling of everything is magnificent. I'm just in awe of people and life and this world. I put myself at sort of like I'm about 5 years old, and everything is amazing. And I'm always watching young kids, and I was watching one the other day playing with something absolutely, something dangling from something else. And he was going, this is so fascinating. When you start to look at life like that, everything is fascinating. There's synchronicity, there's, all these amazing things. And you start to notice around you that, life is full of this mystery, and it's that feeling of awe that, being open to that. Wow, life is so magnificent. Getting to that space and I try and let people, you know, sort of into this world, if you like, about, you know, it's a mystery. Nothing is so clear.
And I can imagine, like, when we're around people who are just so grateful for things and so sincerely curious about what we have to offer. All of you have touched on this. It's like we bring out the best in others.
Yeah, when we're curious about them.
Because we're all magnificent.
Yeah.
Yeah.